Hello, so I'm just gonna make a quick video basically revising for another essay that I've got to write for philosophy. It's gonna be in by next Wednesday and it's currently Saturday and I haven't really done much for it so far except some revision. And I've got exams coming up in January as well on the ethics section of my course, so this topic could also come up on that, so it's probably helpful that I actually do quite a bit of revision on it. Yeah, so the question is, to what extent does natural law provide a helpful method of moral decision making? And well, natural law is basically one of 40 years of law. The first tier of law is eternal law, and this is the law that God wrote at the start of the universe, and this is basically him determining everything and how everything is going to be, both morally, physically, just anything in the universe. That's how God determined it to be. The, the divine law is like, it's like divine command theory or something, and this is basically a written representation of what God determined to be the law. The laws of nature. I think my mum's home. I don't like making videos when there's people in the house. It annoys me. She is. Okay, so yeah, so that would encompass things like the Ten Commandments. And it's like, well, is there a lot of truth to the Ten Commandments? Should we just have these because God wrote them? Should we just abide by them like that? And some people are like, no, because, well, especially like atheist individuals, they're gonna like, well, God didn't write them, this is just from a person. But then you get Aquinas and he's like, well, are the Ten Commandments true or are they not true? And this is where natural law comes in. It's like natural law and divine command theory are almost on the same level. They're both derived directly from the eternal law. So it's not necessarily that the Ten Commandments are higher than natural law. It's more that that I guess you can look at them from a more atheistic perspective. Like I've said in previous videos about synderesis and how we have an ultimate knowledge of good. Yes, God gave us reason and gave us this knowledge of the good almost, but it's us who have to use that to be able to unlock reason. So it's not like we're just following instructions from a higher being and just being expected to abide by it. It's not like that. It's natural laws, like our ability to work out what is good through the means of instinct, which God also gave us. A natural law. I mean, He wrote it into eternal law, and then everything on the planet basically has a set of instincts or inclinations towards their purpose almost. So this links to Aristotle. Purpose is telos, and telos means end, and you can see, well, purpose and end, it's like, what's the end, what's the purpose of this thing, because purpose comes last after. So it's like you make the thing, you find the materials for the thing. Aristotle's four causes, the formal cause, the material cause, the efficient cause, and the purpose. I don't know if they're in the right order, but it's basically the purpose of making something, and purpose comes at the end of that. Because it's what something does. It's how something is in its end form. I can't remember what I was talking about. I got distracted by purpose. Right. So God gave us all a purpose. Perhaps, and all of our purposes are different. So the purpose of people is to reach the form of the good, which links to Plato. So we all have a knowledge of the good inside of us, but we have to be able to work towards it with reason and logic, and through this we are accessing the natural law. Well, the natural law for us anyway is what is good and moral. That's what Aquinas believed. So basically, if we look at the Ten Commandments, theoretically, according to Aquinas, we would be able to work out with reason that that is what we should do. So it's not necessarily just that a man has wrote the Ten Commandments, it's that they've used natural law in order to sort of derive the Ten Commandments from eternal law. Debatably anyway, but I think people from the Bible would just say, no, God wrote these directly from himself, and or spoke to people directly and they wrote it, and that's divine command theory, and that's obviously got a lot of problems because it's only applicable if you're a theistic individual and typically Christian, because it's from Christianity. So I haven't really got too far into actually explaining how helpful natural law is at providing a helpful method at moral decision making, but I have explained natural law quite okay. But I think I haven't explained the 40s of law yet. I've explained 3 of them. So, eternal law, God's law. And eternal means everlasting or existing before and after time. It's not something that's constrained by time necessarily. So that links to perhaps the attributes of God. God is everlasting, eternal. He doesn't. Time's like almost something that we perceive from ourselves, but God exists outside of that completely because he's a perfect being, and he's necessary and non-contingent and immutable. And to say that he's not contingent means he's not dependent on anything else, so that's like saying he is necessary. And to say that he's immutable means he's non-changing. So, and debatably time is movement, so if something changes then it's going through time, but because God doesn't exist in time, he can't change, because if he was changing then he would be in time. So that's that. Okay, so the final tier of law, or the 4th tier of law, is human law, and that's at the bottom, and that's basically the laws that humans set for us to abide by. And this one has a lot more power over us than the natural law, because she has consequences which are enforced by government bodies or the legislation and things like that. So if we break a law like drink driving, for example, then we can go to prison. But if we break a natural law, are we going to prison? No. Unless the natural law also coincides with the human law, which it should. According to Aquinas, there should not be any contradiction between the natural law and the human law. However, this isn't always the case, because there probably are some laws out there which don't necessarily work towards work towards the ultimate good, in a sense, or they're not perhaps reasonable. I'm trying to think. Perhaps unfair working laws in China, which basically allows for labourers to be paid extremely cheap wages in extremely poor conditions, and they're forced to work for hours on end. And there's laws supporting that, but clearly that's human law which isn't supported by the natural law, because natural law would say, well, it's wrong to exploit people. So human law is, I guess, sometimes wrong, but then again, it's a lot more absolute than the natural law, because we have a means of perhaps enforcing it, whereas with natural law it's a lot more ambiguous. Perhaps sometimes people get reason wrong. Some people say, well, I thought it was the right thing to do, but it wasn't. And why would we assume that people always want to do the good? And yes, the human law is sometimes broken, and probably quite often this happens, but if we didn't have the human law and we just had the natural law, that's literally leaving people to their own devices, literally leaving people to be able to work out their own moral decisions all the time. And perhaps we need that legal guideline underneath of us, or above us, to perhaps keep us in check and stop us from acting out so much. So okay, so we can link that back to the question. To what extent does natural law provide a helpful method of moral decision making? Well, based on what I've just said, that natural law is ambiguous and that it's not necessarily, there's nothing to enforce it. It's like, and it leaves people to their own devices. Perhaps it's not so helpful because people don't always do the right thing on their own accord. We need those rules in place in order to be able to perhaps be good or do good. Because Aquinas is almost assuming that people want to be good or want to do good, but this isn't necessarily the case. So it's not such a pragmatic thing that we can really integrate into society. We also need it. Perhaps it is necessary, but we need the human law underneath it in order to be able to really encapsulate the natural law and be able to enforce it that way, so that it's actually, we've actually got some sort of incentive to follow it. Because if we break the natural law, and the natural law isn't necessarily coinciding with the human law, we're not going to get punished for it. Unless you're a religious believer, then you believe you're going to go to hell, then yes. But especially in recent years and the incline of secularization, which means that the decrease in the importance of religion, can we really leave people up to their own devices? But then again, that's assuming that morality comes from God. And does morality come from God? And I would say no, because I would say I'm more of an atheist than an agnostic or a theist. And I say I'm able to use reason effectively to be able to work out what is good. Then again, Aquinas isn't necessarily saying we should listen to God. He's saying that we should use our reason to work out what is good, and what is good is what God has determined. But does that necessarily matter who determined what is good? Perhaps Aquinas just says that because in his time it would have been a taboo to say otherwise. Of course God did it. Of course, because that would have got him almost like put outside of society. Like, I think Aquinas, he is a reasonable guy, and he does know what he's talking about, and I don't think he's so strongly theistic that he would have stuck by his guns no matter what, even with opposing scientific evidence. Yeah, so okay, the video is going to cut out really soon, so I'm going to have to cut it off there. I think I've explained quite a lot. I haven't really gone too deep into answering the question properly, but I think I've really explained the 4 tiers of law in adequate detail, and yeah, I've gone into some other ideas too. So yeah, you'll probably only find this really interesting if you're studying philosophy at college, or you have an actual interest in sort of abstract topics like this. But if not, then sorry. Okay, thanks for watching.